Okay, so we're going to look in this revision session at the beginning of Streetcar, okay? And I'm just going to open with the importance of the epigraph, because students so often forget that this is a vital part. It kind of sets the tone of the play, and it also is a very important literary reference to something that was close to Tennessee Williams' heart. Hart Crane was another Southerner, and he was part of the whole idea of the decline of the South. And in this particular poem, he talks about entering the broken world, which means that we immediately align with Blanche. I think that's really important. So we go into Blanche's mind, because this is clearly the lens that we should use when we go into the play. And he says here, an instant in the wind. Now it sets the tone of the kind of image patterns that we see in the play of butterflies, moss, fragility, pink light, etc. And I think it's going to align on a biographical level. I think you know about this, Seren, with his sister Rose, and the idea of the damaged people in the world. Now, of course, our paradigm is always tragedy, and it's going to be very important for us that in terms of establishing this kind of mood and world, this diegesis of tragedy, okay? Now I'm going to go on to the beginning of the play, because this is so important. We know that it's a two-story corner building, so it's meant to be really natural. And this play is all about the mix between naturalism and expressionism. And I'm going to be talking about that and how important the plastic theatre is and the expressionist theatre techniques are, okay? So it's ordinary, but it has a raffish charm. Now, raffish is a really beautiful word, because it kind of then associates it with things like sensuality, which is going to link to Stanley, okay? I think the key thing is to understand that New Orleans has this kind of multicultural Latinness to it. It's been both French and Spanish, associated with kind of hot Latin blood, sexuality, together with the fact that it is a multicultural city that has a lot of black people in it, and it is the birthplace of jazz and blues. And that's going to be incredibly important in terms of establishing the mise-en-scène of the play, okay? The sky is peculiarly tender blue. This is a beautiful little piece of pathetic fallacy, because we feel the blanchness in it. Almost turquoise. This is going to be really important, because at the end of the play, Blanche imagines herself on a cruise, doesn't she, with a guy with beautiful blue eyes. So it's to do with this kind of tenderness and lyricism that exists in the background. Now, a lot of this is to do with the kind of romanticizing of the South. Now, Tennessee Williams is guilty of this, but he also shows the fact that the South is in permanent decline. And it's no surprise that during the play that Edgar Allan Poe is referenced a number of times. At the moment, there's a brilliant program on TV called The Fall of the House of Usher. And it kind of shows this kind of permanent decline of the South. The idea that the South was once glorious and gallant, but is now dilapidated and in decline. So, we know that our play has a lot of binaries, and one of the binaries is this idea of decline and sickness, which is largely represented by the sort of Anglo-Saxon, Nordic white culture of the South. But notice, in the background, we have these lovely tropical things, banana and coffee, and then we have the music of the Negro entertainers. This is really important, because black culture is associated with a kind of dynamism, sexuality, something that we could call a kind of Dionysian, the Greek god of like drink and sexuality and music. So there is an incredible vibrancy to the play. Now, I'm suggesting in this opening scene why the stage directions are absolutely central is that we have this kind of movement between a white, dying South and this kind of vitality. There's a beautiful phrase in this that you should commit to memory: the infatuated fluency of brown fingers. Now, from a white point of view, from a white, conservative, southern, perhaps female point of view, this is a threatening image, isn't it? It's about a new post-war culture. It coincides with civil rights in the United States, doesn't it? And it also coincides with a kind of loosening of sexual mores. Let's not forget that Blanche herself is highly sexual, but her sexuality is hidden, isn't it? It's kind of disguised. Whereas New Orleans is open sexuality. It's Stanley. It's raw meat. It's sensuality. It's men in t-shirts sweating, full of desire for their wives and girlfriends, etc. And this, of course, is symbolized very, very clearly by the blue piano music. So this is really important in terms of establishing this kind of expressionism. Music defines mood. And we have two different types of music that dominate. We've got the blue piano that represents this vitality, these brown fingers, the modern America, the march of history. And then we have the Vesuviana, which looks back to Europe, isn't it? And seems to typify this white plantation culture. Why the Vesuviana is so powerful is that it is off-key in all of the scenes. There's a kind of joyousness to it, which is so disturbing, given that Blanche is reimagining the suicide of her husband and the death of that kind of world. Whereas the blue piano, on the other hand, is the present. Now, why all of this is so effective, and I'm going to go into it a bit more in a moment, is because of the idea of this kind of translucent scenery, yeah? Now, you will remember that this is part of the plastic theatre. Now, that's Tennessee Williams' term. And the plastic theatre means that you can go into the mind of the characters more. So we've got two things operating. We've got this incredible music that is playing throughout, and we also have this translucent theatre, which is allowing us to see what is happening on the outside. We have the intermingling of the races, and already remember we're looking through Blanche's mind, so we understand that this is going to be absolutely terrifying and threatening. And in the meantime, this is what's so interesting. We have the voices of the people, and don't forget, because the walls are translucent, we're able to see things like shadows, etc. So this is going to take away the idea of any kind of domestic security. When we think about the home, we're often thinking about hearth and all of those comforting images, etc. But this is an urban dwelling. It has no sense of comfort whatsoever. It is a truly frightening and absolutely terrifying place. So just to finish this page, we end with this kind of cacophony of sound. The blue piano, the voices of the people, the overlappingness, etc. And in the background, we need to be thinking of Balrev and this idea of this beautiful estate of quiet and retreat, a kind of fairy tale place in the countryside. Here, Blanche is going to be plunged into a hostile urban world, filled with all this sensuality and raffish charm, etc. It's not going to be a comfortable place for her. So looking at the designs for it, just to remind you that you can have a beautiful combination of inside and outside. We have a kind of sense of claustrophobia caused by the proximity to the street. We also have Eunice and Steve upstairs, and they seem to represent what Stanley and Stella are going to become later, like a kind of worn-out version of them after all the sensuality is gone, etc. In terms of what the set might look like, this is a nice kind of idea to give you a sense of the translucence, and also to give you a sense of the way in which the domestic is kind of plunged and blurs with an urban landscape of noises and shadows, locomotives and sounds. The idea that you cannot have a privacy. There's no sanctuary in this place. And of course, because this is an expressionist play, a lot of it takes place in Blanche's mind. And this is where the plastic theatre comes in. We're going to live in Blanche's world, where Vesuviana music blends with jungle sounds and shadows. And this will be a very important element of the tragedy, will be because Blanche is really the lens into the play. And we enter Blanche's mind, and of course not Stanley's. And Melziner was the original designer, and he very much wanted to capture this kind of translucence in which there is no boundary between inside and outside. Okay? Now moving on, I'm just going to do a little bit more of the opening of the play. And it's interesting that we begin with a Negro woman. Again, we need to think about the context of the play, set in 1945. And what's very interesting here, of course, is the way in which a Southern audience would see this. And we have the kind of blending of race. Eunice herself may very well be a mixed-race person, and there's a kind of easiness in terms of race relations, which would be kind of quite horrifying to Blanche, who would have believed in a kind of racial hierarchy and a kind of apartheid system of racial segregation that would have existed. Okay? And you'll notice that right away we're plunged into the demotic use of language. It's vernacular, it's street language, isn't it? Blanche will speak a completely different type of language. Her diction is much more formal, it's literary. She speaks the language as perhaps I do of the pretentious English literature teacher. Whereas here, Tennessee Williams plunges us into the language of the street. And we see a man and a sailor and the Negro woman here. Where's the Four Juices? In the background, we have the red hearts. So we get the sense of the vibrancy of the city, the noises, etc. All of these will be horrifying, of course, to Blanche. And notice the Negro woman begins with a note of caution. Don't waste your money in that clip joint. A clip joint being a place where you get cheated. The sailor says, I've got a date there. Now this will be very important, won't it, in terms of scene 10, when Stanley is going to refer to the rape as a date. Red heart in the background. So already we have this fantastic layering of sounds, don't we? We've got this kind of demotic, rude street speech together with the noises of the street. It really sets the mise-en-scène well, and this is going to be very important for showing Blanche under attack in a hostile environment with nowhere to go. And the Negro woman accentuates this sense of danger. Don't let them sell you a Blue Moon cocktail, or you won't go out on your own feet. Here we have the idea of deception, death, and the fact that the bar is so close to the house. The moon is something that Blanche loves, and we have this song about the paper moon. Here the moon is being corrupted into a kind of symbol of sorcery or magic or deception. And into the scene comes our male protagonist, Stanley Kowalski, and his sidekick, Mitch. They are 28 and 30 years old, roughly dressed in denim work clothes. Don't forget that denim was the sign of being working class, of being a working man in the United States. Stanley carries a bowling jacket. Now, often he wears kind of bright colors, like some kind of brightly colored peacock bird-like. Williams tells us, doesn't he, that he has the kind of splendor of the savage sexual animal, etc. And very symbolically, he's carrying a package from the butchers of meat. And this imagery of meat connects to the physicality of the streets the maleness, the dirt, the noise, the blue piano, all of these image clusters establish a mise-en-scène which is hostile to the fragility and femininity of Blanche. Now, how do we see this plastic theatre operating elsewhere in the play? Well, I'm going to turn all the way to scene 10, and we're going to be looking at the prelude to the assault, to the sexual assault. And we're going to see how this plastic theatre really takes us into Blanche's mind and shows us her incredible vulnerability. And by contrast, it shows us the hardness of Stanley's world, of New Orleans, and of the urban jungle. So here, Blanche is terribly upset. We know that Mitch tried to rape her in the scene before. Here she's desperately trying to phone random people. And what happens is the night is filled with inhuman voices like cries in the jungle. So this is another element of the oral imagery in the play, of the soundscape of the city. In visual terms, we have this kind of play of shadows and of reflections. And once again, establishing a sense of eeriness, of surrealness, and of the pain that she's experiencing in her mind. Now, this is a beautiful and incredible bit, because outside we see, as the walls become transparent, because of, as I said before, the theatre set, as we can see here, can become transparent at other stages. We have the exterior coming into the room. And to me, this is one of my favorite parts of the play, because outside, a prostitute has rolled a drunkard, has mugged a drunkard. He pursues her along the walk, overtakes her, and there's a struggle and a policeman's whistle. Why this little detail? Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because we see the mirroring of the sexual violence and of the predatoriness outside in the external world at the same time that it's happening inside. It seems like a trivial detail, but it's absolutely key to mise-en-scène and a brilliant use of the plastic theatre. And in terms of all of these shadows and these fears and inhuman cries, etc., it shows plastic theatre at its most powerful, because we go into Blanche's mind, we see the insanity that she's feeling, etc. And then going back to the stage directions, a Negro woman appears round the corner with a sequined bag. She finds the bag that the prostitute has dropped, and she roots around it excitedly. And this essentially is a kind of urban jungle. It's survival of the fittest, isn't it? Now, Williams himself was fascinated by New Orleans, and he loved it, and he was drawn to the darkness of it. But he's also here evoking how terrifying the darkness is, because we're looking through Blanche's eyes, and we're usually in Blanche's mind at this particular point, okay? And here we return inside. We've been outside, and here again is where we see the plastic theatre. We're now on Blanche, and she's screaming, "Operator, operator, never mind, long distance, get Western Union." And of course, the absolute pathos of this scene in terms of the tragedy is that she is trying to call Shep Huntley, a semi-fictional person, who, if he ever had any particular resonance in her life, is now really a kind of mythical character. So the only gallant or shining knight that she can find is one that she's created in her own imagination. And that takes us back to the Hart Crane poem that I spoke about, which actually frames the entire play. She is really like the speaker of the broken world. She's looking for an instant in the wind, and the desperation is here. And so it's an absolutely moving and really pitiful scene. And we see that her diction breaks down, the desperation, the hyphens here, caught in a trap, and she can no longer speak. And then out of the bathroom comes Stanley in his brilliant silk pajamas, like some kind of striped tiger predator. And in a lot of play versions, he is in complete control. It's very important to talk about the proxemics, and Stanley here, I think, would take his time, and he would stalk her as a predator would stalk its prey. He says he left the phone off the hook, crosses deliberately and sets it back. This is the body language of power. This is someone who knows they're in control, and that's confirmed by this slow curving grin. Of course, the inevitable blue piano now comes in, and the drums beat louder. So again, we have this cacophony of sounds, and of course, this is the interior of Blanche's mind. The blue piano is Stanley's world. It's the music of New Orleans. It's the music of raw sexuality. Now, Blanche, we know, is also a sexual being, but she's one who hides her sexuality. She's someone who comes out of a more Victorian conception that sexuality is something that is in the bedroom. Stanley, on the other hand, celebrates it. That's why he has the striped pajamas. That's why so often he's referred to as this kind of wild, stripy predator, bird of prey, stone man, this person who celebrates his physicality, etc. So I'm going to end just by saying the plastic theatre is absolutely central to taking us inside Blanche's mind. It's a brilliant innovation that allows this inside-outside divide to be broken. Some of you may be familiar with the idea of a fourth wall. You could talk about it in a Brechtian sense if you've come across that before. But I think the most important thing from this scene is the extraordinary kind of balance between naturalism, dark realism of the streets, and the expressionism, which is all of the symbolism that Williams uses to show the interior of Blanche's mind. And I think a great deal of credit does need to go to Milzina, who developed this incredible set in conjunction with Williams and was able to develop this new kind of plastic translucent theatre. Thanks for listening. I hope that was useful.